Hello and welcome to the very first episode of UnHerd, a podcast hosted by ACT that delves into the extraordinary stories of individuals who are challenging conventional principles to disrupt India's social impact landscape. When we think of environmental concerns, plastic waste management is always top of mind. India generates an estimated 3.4 million tons of plastic waste annually, out of which only 30% gets recycled. The remainder is essentially non-recyclable and either ends up in landfills for incineration or is dumped in aquatic bodies, contributing to carbon emissions and severely impacting local ecologies. Our guest today is the founder of APChemi, a chemist turned social entrepreneur who decided to address this gap by pioneering an advanced pyrolysis technology that truly enables plastic circularity. APChemi is breaking barriers associated with traditional recycling by converting non-recyclable plastic waste into a purified oil, which can be used to produce sustainable chemicals and even aviation fuel. Having partnered with corporates and municipal corporations alike, the solution has the potential to also offset the demand for fossil fuels in the long term. Welcome to UnHerd, Suhas.
Thank you so much, Alankrita. Thank you.
Really glad to have you. You're a chemistry major who could have
Yeah,
worked in any global corporation of your choice, but your obsession with plastic waste led you to become an entrepreneur and start AP Chemi. What's the story there?
lot of early age motivations kind of form the what you do tomorrow. Back then, when I was a kid, that time kids used to burn plastics. I was brought up in an interior village in Maharashtra, so there these kind of things used to happen. Now I know that burning plastic waste is incineration and that creates a lot of harm. But yes, back then that was the first introduction to plastic subjecting plastic to heat. And then after that, during graduation, it so happened that we had some kind of a glassware assembly arranged, and
Hmm.
I was like, okay, now that the professor has not turned up, what if I put plastic into the reactor and see what comes out from the condenser?
Hmm.
So those were the early stage experiments. It's not like you have an idea, the idea has you.
Yeah. And I remember this really interesting story from one of our earlier conversations where you had essentially created a small plant and you had demonstrated it by putting it into the back of your car. Would love to hear a little bit more about that. What was that initial hustle?
Yeah, I mean, after the management studies, I worked for corporates in marketing, deciding strategies, how what the sales team would implement and all. I did that corporate kind of a job till 2007, but it didn't give me the satisfaction. I wanted to do something around converting plastic into oil. Those few experiments that I did during the graduation kind of motivated me to do that. So uh, uh, I quit my stable job, used my all of my savings to put up a small pyrolysis plant to convert maybe 1 or 2 kgs of plastic into oil, and then started showing off those plants at it's like you get a free stall at city council exhibitions because there's hardly anybody who wants to go there and exhibit. So entrepreneurs, very early stage entrepreneurs who don't know what they are doing, they very easily get a stall there. So I started displaying it there, thinking that I'll display it at an exhibition of a municipal corporation, and I'll get a contract of the municipal corporation, not knowing at all what government contracting is. But then that's once you put your idea out there in the world, people who like your idea kind of start talking to you, and then that leads to something. But around 2018, a lot of legislation started around circularity of plastics, and that led us to understand that just because if you convert plastic into oil, that's not enough. That oil needs to have a good enough quality. So that's where the industry started going once the legislations came supporting advanced or chemical recycling of plastic waste. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the market has definitely changed quite a whole lot. But, when I think of founders and especially founders in the clean tech space, actually founders anywhere really, it's all about failing fast, learning fast, pivoting fast. What are the lessons that enabled you to build faster, better, stronger with AP Chemi today?
So uh, I mean, the way I look at entrepreneurship is it's your decision to solve problems, the problems that have not been solved. And the moment you venture into something like that, then there are bound to be failures. And
Mm.
then once the mistakes come, what can make a lot of difference is how quickly you get over with it and
Yeah.
just solve it and create a larger value, so that this failure that you encounter, uh, that just doesn't mean much in the overall turn of events. This happened in somewhere around uh, 2011 to 2014,
Mm.
wherein I had a stable reactor design and a process plant design where we knew that we could deliver that design and ensure that the what we promise gets delivered.
Mm.
During that time, I came across a gentleman who had served at a very high level as a senior process engineer and director of a global organization. He proposed a design of reactor which would work better than my existing reactor design, and I tried. I was like, I got influenced. I thought that, okay, somebody else's idea, new ideas, just because that person is experienced, can work better than my proven ideas. And I adopted that design in a project that had nothing to do with him, of course, with his consent. And then the whole thing did not work out. So
Mm.
that's where I learned a lesson that don't get infatuated about, if somebody comes across very intimidating, just be grounded. You know your technology, you know what you're doing, so just stick to that,
Mm.
and don't take decisions of um, don't take sudden decisions as such. It was the focus was more on selling systems that works, but with APChemi, agile process chemical cell, we our focus is more on building collaborations that sustain. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's interesting how you weave that into your company name as well. It was such a big lesson at that point of time. There's always this one big driver that propels this journey forward, right? So for you, Suhas, in the larger context of India's climate goals, what is that catalytic role that you as a social entrepreneur see yourself playing?
I mean, we as an organization, we believe that we can divert 500 kilotons per annum of plastic waste away from landfilling and incineration by
Mm.
2030. We
Right.
are setting up a oil purification plant of our own, first of its kind plant in India, to upgrade the pyrolysis oil to requirement of a petrochemical buyer. And uh, then also we want to license this technology so that
Mm.
we don't have to depend on crude oil for production of new plastics.
So it's almost like playing a role in the larger decarbonization movement. I do actually want to, at this juncture of the conversation, I do want to share a snapshot of AP Chemi's trajectory so far. I mean, your solution has recycled 179 million kgs of non-recyclable plastic waste into pyrolysis oil, with the goal of reaching 1 billion in the next years. It's created over 3,000 jobs, over 47 projects, has 5 granted patents, with 12 more in the pipeline, and successful partnerships with folks like Shell and KIIT, TBI, and the Indo-Danish Hydrogen Coal and more. Your conviction to build and grow in this space seems to have moved mountains. But there must have been seeds of doubt along the way, right? What have been some of the am I doing the right thing sort of moments that you've encountered which really made you pause, like genuinely made you feel like, do I need to second think this?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, nobody can really escape the self-doubt, right? I mean, at some point in time, you start questioning whether you deserve this or not, or whether you are smart enough to handle the situation or not,
Mm.
or whether you're capable enough or not. And I mentioned that, like, I tried to adopting somebody else's design, and the project kind of failed. When this failure came, I I went to an advisor of mine, a very senior chemical engineer who has lot of experience and has got one of the highest award from government of India. So I told him that this is what I did. This is the
Yeah.
liability that has been created because the reactor design that I uh, tried didn't work, and then now I need to solve this problem, and I have this much of money in my hand. Where do I go from here? I have
Mm.
all kind of self doubts, and I've just come here to find a solution from you. So what he did is was very surprising to me. He made me take an IQ test, and yeah, so he made me take an IQ test while I was there at his office. And at the end of the IQ test, I mean, I asked why did you ask me to do an IQ test? So he told me his principle or a theory that if the IQ is more than 110, then you should get into business of solving the problems. And if the IQ is less than 110, then you should get into the business of managing the problem rather than solving. You can hire people to solve the problem. So
Right.
since my IQ somehow turned out to be more than 110, then he gave me a kind of a confidence that I can solve the problem. And then, I mean, that was it. I mean, he just handled me in the lowest of my moment. Probably he has seen more rainy seasons than me, so he understood that just handling this moment of low is more important than just giving this guy a solution. But I mean, going back to your question, how do you overcome your self doubt? Probably only by perseverance.
What have been some of the bigger risks, if I may call it that?
So when crude oil prices crashed in 2014, the market for converting plastic to oil kind of got wiped off overnight.
Yeah.
Crude oil prices were $120 per barrel, and that got slashed down to $30 per barrel. And pyrolysis oil that was getting sold at around 60, 70, 80 rupees per liter, the prices of it got crashed to like 20, 30 rupees per liter, because of which when the whole market changes, kind of it's a huge shuffle. All your relationships change, all your projects change, your projects gets cancelled, and suddenly the team of 80 engineers that you have don't have any job to do. So I was in that situation. And what I did is for almost 1.5 years, I carried that heavy load of 80 engineers, and I exhausted all financial resources that I had, and almost, went to zero. Lost everything that I had just to pay salaries of a heavy team, hoping that market will turn around. The lesson that I learned is that you got to do something in this situation. You cannot just say, just because you have money, you cannot keep it burning. You cannot carry a heavy load that is not working on the problem. So the highest risk that I took probably was to learn the lesson that was required to be learned, I guess.
From an external lens, a clean tech founder's life just sounds very exciting. You're building new technologies, you're charting new growth paths for the company, you're being recognized as an innovator, as a disruptor. But we know that's not the whole picture, right? Especially for early stage companies. There are struggles that are not always actually visible to everybody on the outside.
Yeah.
What have been those for you in the current context?
So if you see current plastic scenario, if you have to recycle plastic, first of all, the plastic waste has to be segregated. But facing the reality, less than 15% of plastic waste gets segregated. If you see what gets segregated, only the water bottles, PET bottles get segregated a lot, because it is easy to pick up and it has got very good rate in the market. But flexible plastics like your chips packets, those don't get those don't get picked up. So flexible packaging kind of straight goes to the landfill, or it goes for incineration in cement plants, or burning in the waste to energy plants. So if we look at the value chain, consumers don't care about segregation of plastic waste. Plastic waste goes to the municipal corporation. Municipal corporation doesn't really care about recycling of plastic. They just want to get rid of their plastic waste, and the entire contract is handed over to the municipal solid waste contractor. A municipal solid waste contractor is more interested in collaborating with municipal corporation than seeing how much is recycled. And then material recovery facilities, or we can debate on what percentage of material recovery facilities across India are operational, but most of them have challenges in operations. Their mindset is that if it is flexible, just burn it off. So these material recovery facilities don't want to talk to chemical recycling companies or pyrolysis companies, because pyrolysis companies require a good quality of plastic waste.
Yeah.
And then petrochemical companies are not very open with pyrolysis plants for the size difference. Like a petrochemical company would be $1 billion asset. They are not very open to hundreds of pyrolysis plants. And then there is a disconnect between polymer producers and FMCG companies, where the relationship tends to be more commercial on how cheap can you give me, rather than asking a question: what is the recycled content in your polymer, or can you give me recycled polymers? That discussion is yet to start because legislations don't demand it. So if you, in the value chain, you got consumer, municipal corporation, pyrolysis projects or recyclers, then you have got your polymer producers or packaging players, and then FMCG player. It's a huge value chain of plastic circularity, and there's not a single platform where all these players are kind of forced to come together, or there's not a single legislation that enables these people to joyfully come together and create something.
EPR in various countries, including India, essentially what it does is it mandates producers and brands to take accountability for this post-consumer waste. Is that having any positive connotations for what you're trying to do with APChemi? Like, is that enough to be able to drive this in the right direction?
See, some amount of responsibility is always better than zero responsibility. So what EPR does is assigns responsibility to the brand owners, FMCGs, and packaging companies. But there are 2-3 dimensions here. First of all, as far as EPR is considered, who should be made liable? Should it be only FMCGs, brand owners, and packaging companies, or should you also involve the polymer producers? Right now, the EPR framework that we have doesn't include the polymer producers. For polymer producers, there is no compulsion to look into the extended producer responsibility of producing the polymers. So there is a disconnect there. So the management of plastic waste has a huge carbon footprint. What EPR does is that it enforces management of plastic waste, which is good, but EPR should go a little beyond management of plastic waste and also look into what is the carbon footprint of managing the plastic waste.
So almost like a plastic tax. I don't know if I may call it that.
Plastic tax would probably be a tipping point for seriousness around plastic waste management. So the difference between a legislation and a legislation on tax is that if you don't follow a government guideline on EPR, you are doing something wrong, but then there's no serious consequences of it. But if you have something like plastic tax, and if you don't follow the legislation around plastic tax, then evading taxes is a very serious situation. So it kind of puts everybody on the spot. But then again, that plastic tax, whom all does it affect? Plastic tax would do much better than EPR, 1,000 times better. But then covering the entire value chain is more important than just having these legislations.
It's really hard to not look at one without looking at another. And interestingly enough, I recently read somewhere that even though Asia is like the center of the plastic waste crisis in a lot of ways, 95% of investments to solve these plastic problems are actually happening in the US and Europe. And we know clean energy is a huge opportunity, but I think also the biggest challenge for climate tech startups is often to secure enough funding to overcome that period between, creating a minimal viable product to reaching product market fit. In that context, what are some of the big things you have learned along the way?
Amount of funds available for these kind of initiatives, and overall availability of funds to SMEs, small and medium enterprises, is very low in India. For example, probably only access to capital that entrepreneurs in India have is this funding scheme called CGTMSE. Other than that, there's not much access to capital that really small and medium entrepreneurs have. Compare that to these developed countries. So if you set up a business, let us say in Singapore, it's very easy to get substantial transit in 3 stages. One to develop the technology, second to scale it up, and third to commercialize. So government is betting at least, you can say, $500,000 on entrepreneurs who are serious at what they want to do in all of these developed countries. Compared to that, capital availability in India is challenged for small and medium enterprises. Very earlier on, what we realized is that like when I attended those municipal corporation exhibitions and displayed my technology there as a very young entrepreneur way back in 2007, 2008, very quickly I realized that stop dreaming about $1 million contract. I mean, that time. And what is more important than raising funds is having a cash flow. So as long as you have a cash flow, whether in whichever part of the world that you are, you will sail through.
Yeah. And I was also hearing you talk about one of your mentors, and it almost feels like the presence of the right mentors, the right advisors is also fairly critical.
Of course, not only they bring in a very independent perspective, but they also encourage. So that kind of plays a very important role for entrepreneurs. I tried to build something without advisors. Of course, I went ahead, but it felt like a lot of struggle. It is not necessary that you have to struggle so much. Of course, you have to put in effort. Effort and struggle is a different thing. So effort doesn't get reduced, but the struggle gets reduced for sure in case you have right advisors.
We know that cracking PMF with like a B2B solution in the sustainability space is actually quite tricky. In your experience, the journey that you have traversed with APChemi so far, what is that right approach, if we can even call it that, for clean tech founders to adopt?
So in market, you're going to come across 10 different customers or 100 different customers. You cannot say that each of these customers have the exactly same requirement and I'll serve them with this technology only and this solution only. And the entire, the strategy product market fit will work like this. So it really helps to talk to them, and also not only entrepreneur talking to them, but also training your team on how to interview the customers, understand where do they come from, what are their priorities, what are their worries, what they are looking for to go to the next step. There's no substitute for it. But at back of your mind, you need to understand that every customer is going to be different, and you customer dictates the product market fit rather than you dictating the product market fit.
Completely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. So customer centricity is, I think, extremely key. But I want to come back to your big purpose, Suhas. You articulated that a little bit while ago, and you talked about decarbonization. And look, that's not a revenue goal. That's not a valuation goal. That's an environmental goal. Right? So for social entrepreneurs, I feel like it's so imperative to focus on both purpose and profit. How do you balance business sustainability with climate impact?
So profit can also be one of the purpose, and lot of entrepreneurs work on that idea that as long as I'm making profit, that is a good purpose to have and all will be good. But very soon, and hopefully sooner than later, there's some emptiness that comes into the business. It becomes very artificial and you don't really solve real problems and all. And I mean, I learned this from my grandfather. I asked my grandfather about some advice for the business and all one day. And he asked me, what do you call finance in Marathi? I didn't know. He said, go and ask. So my mother told me that it's called Arthashastra. I think that makes sense. So I went back to him, and then he made me understand the meaning of that word. That there is Artha and then there is Shastra. So it is Artha is meaning, and then Shastra is science. So science of meaning is Arthashastra. The way we think about business or profitability in our this part of the world, as long as meaning is there, money will be a byproduct of it. Profitability will be a byproduct of it.
Yeah, in fact, I remember in one of our earlier conversations, I have heard you say that purpose takes you much more farther than things like market valuations, etc. ever will. And that to me was actually a very powerful statement, right? what are some of those fundamental shifts that founders who are building in this space need to keep a very close watch on so that they can help India accelerate its progress towards our climate action objective?
So that's a very interesting question. I mean, if entrepreneurs indulges into doing something that is not aligned internally and externally, there'll be a lot of disappointment, regardless of whether the market has challenges or not. Once you have that base, uh, then what probably you want to do is, as early as possible, get advisors. Having somebody else challenge your ideas in a friendly manner is it's extremely valuable, especially earlier on, so
Yeah.
as to prevent the blunders. Then market is going to be mix of opportunities and challenges. If you focus more on challenges, you will experience more of that, but find out where are the opportunities and focus on that. And also try to match the size of opportunity with size of expenditure that you have to incur to
Yeah.
keep the business alive. Go for smaller opportunities as well. So if you are an entrepreneur and probably if nobody knows about you, you want to ensure that you have an invoice ready for a smallest size to a medium size to a largest size, so that
Yeah.
whenever you come across a market, a problem in a market where somebody can pay for your goods or services or expertise, you have that to offer.
This has been absolutely incredible, Suhas. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation today.
Thanks, Alakrita. Thank you so much.
This brings us to the end of our first episode of UnHerd, a podcast presented by Team Act. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to our Spotify and YouTube channels, where we'll bring you more unheard stories of people who are passionate about creating impact at scale in differential ways. People who truly stand apart from the herd. Follow us, like, subscribe, and share.